I've learned from doing conferences for 30 years that the devil lives in the audio, so we'll cope as best we can. So I served, I want to ask the photo, if we could bring the photo up. I've asked a photo to be able, that we can display as part of my opening comments. So I live in California, and Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed me to the California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. And the picture that you see behind me is a picture that I took from my street 2 years ago.
Wow.
Several years prior, my entire neighborhood burned to the ground in what until that point was the largest wildfire in U.S. history that burned over 2,000 homes. If you look at this picture, the left has a narrative to go along with this picture. And the left's narrative is climate change. That human-caused climate change is what's causing these wildfires, and that's the reason this is happening, and therefore that is the impetus to do whatever the left wants on this issue. And absent any counter-narrative, that narrative will prevail. And unfortunately, there is very little pushback to the left's narrative here. However, from my experience on the California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, it calls out to say, no, wait a second. This fire is not the result of climate change. This fire is the result of bad management of public lands. And combined with 150 years of putting out every single fire that comes along, and so we have 150 years of fuel buildup because of government policies that lead to these catastrophic wildfires. And so the left has a very clear narrative when it comes to these environmental issues, and that's what we're going to start with today. So Rob, our MEP from the Netherlands, you're quite an expert and thought leader in this area. My question to you is, what is a narrative, once it's set, becomes very difficult to break. So what is the current narrative on environmental issues, and what should that narrative become if we are to change it to be more successful going forward?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, it's a very good question, but first of all, I want to thank New Direction for organizing this event. I've heard today a lot of good things, and it's very important that we share views together and also inform each other about technology and solutions. I think we do that not enough on let's say, on the right side. Well, let's start with a big cliche. We are conservatives, and therefore we aim to conserve. We aim to conserve our traditions and our identities, and we should also aim to conserve our natural beauty and also our environment. It's not ours, it's our ancestors handed this over to us, and we have to maintain it, and even better, to improve it in order to pass it to our children and our grandchildren in a good condition. For too long, too many conservatives have been focusing on the economy only, without creating new ideas on any other topic. And that is why the left is now dominating the discourse regarding, for instance, culture and the arts, but also on the environment. And that is why I very much think that this conference is necessary. We, as conservatives, have to actively think about our own ideas instead of continuing to play by the left rules. So, what is our view based on? It should be based on the conservation of our natural landscapes, of our biodiversity, so that the next generations can continue to live life the way our ancestors did. Greens have neglected this. In the past, they rightly emerged as a new political force to draw attention to neglect of the environment. When I was young, I was also a member of Greenpeace, by the way.
Nobody's perfect.
Well, I think, yeah. But nowadays, they don't care about the environment anymore. The only thing they care about is climate. In much Western Europe, they actually support destroying the environment to build wind turbines and solar farms everywhere. And saving the planet by burning complete forests, it's called biomass. It's a disgrace. Greens have become watermelons, green on the outside, but red on the inside. The real aim is not to preserve the environment, but to push forward socialist, maybe communist policies to take away people's freedom and give more power to the state, killing free market and killing innovation. And they have succeeded in doing so. In the European Union, I can see with my own eyes every day how they dominate the debate. They have also been successful in pressuring the former center-right parties in adopting their narrative. Formerly respectable Christian Democrats and liberal parties now support the worst big government policies in the name of climate. But our environment, our nature, the Greens don't care anymore. Greens call climate, environment and nature in one breath. But their climate policy is actually very bad for the environment and nature. If we talk about renewables, we talk about wind turbines, solar panels and biomass. I want to explain them all one by one. Biomass. It was sold to burn wood waste. But it's pure marketing. First, the word biomass, it sounds very good, and using waste as energy sounds also very good. But then it became big business. Billions of subsidies. In my country only, we have 7.5 million people, and we have subsidized it with 7.5 billion euros. So that's 1,000 euro per citizen. It's really a lot of money. But as a matter of fact, in the end, it is burning complete forests. We get them from the United States, we get them from Estland, and it's not helping the planet at all. And the socialist European Union Commissioner Timmermans is always speaking about saving biodiversity. But the truth is, he is the one who is committing ecocide. Ecocide is the word also made up by the left to kill the fossil fuel industry. But this is real ecocide. If you destroy complete forest, I don't have another word for it. Because of compared to coal, biomass is more air polluting. It has a higher CO2 emission. And to conclude on biomass, it's a disaster for nature and environment, and it isn't helping the climate in any case. Then wind and solar. They both depend on weather conditions. And they are both very low energy density. Because we cannot store the energy of solar and wind, we need a backup. And the only backup is with gas, because we have to manage the grid. It has to be done very fast, and gas is the only way. And where is this gas coming from? From Russia. And that's not what we want anymore. So if you invest in more wind and solar, we need also more gas. We have Repower EU, and that is the solution for the energy crisis because of the war in Ukraine. And what did the European Union, the European Commission do? They came up with a solution to instead of 40% renewables by 2030, they had a solution 45% by 2030. So even more. So doing more of the same, that is typically the European Union. And the problem of this energy crisis was because we invested in renewables and we made us depend on Russian gas because of that. You can do it also with LNG, but LNG has another problem. It has a lot of leakage of methane. And methane is a real greenhouse gas. It's 84 more a greenhouse gas than CO2. So that's the problem of LNG. The second problem is the low energy density of solar and wind. We need a lot of it to produce some energy. And that means also a lot of raw materials, but also the use of a lot of land space. But after 15 years, we have a lot of waste. And this kind of waste is very difficult to recycle. We are burning complete rotor blades now to get rid of them, but also the solar panels are very toxic and very difficult to recycle. So that's a problem for the coming 15 years. And again, after 15 years again, it's coming back. Most of these raw materials is controlled by China. And the Greens and the Liberals and the Christian Democrats in the European Parliament are saying that renewables make us independent as a European Union, but that's not the case. If the supply chain is controlled by China, we are not independent. And the danger for nature is that sun and wind need a lot of land space or sea space. And I initiated a study in the European Parliament to look at the cost of land space in my country, the Netherlands, and also in the Czech Republic, of wind and solar compared to nuclear. And the conclusion is that both countries, the Czech Republic and the Netherlands, are too small to produce enough energy and with solar and wind. And that means that nature will be sacrificed for these wind turbines and solar panels, and still we don't have enough energy. But with nuclear, we don't have all these problems. It has a very high energy density, and it's very reliable, it's very steady. So to conclude on solar and wind, we depend on foreign governments and not the ones that share our values. It is also bad for nature, it's bad for the biodiversity, and we still need fossil fuels. And nuclear energy can solve all these problems. So, and then I come to my last point, and because there is the solution, and we said that before, going to nuclear. The Greens don't care anymore about our nature and the environment, but we should, as conservatives, we should do that. Not just to use a stick to hit the Greens, but we should care. And we have the best solutions. If you think that climate is a problem, we should use nuclear energy. It has many advantages. It's safe, it's clean, it's reliable, it's carbon-free, it has a high energy density, so we don't need much land space, and that's preserves nature and biodiversity. And we have a good example because France started 40 years ago with that. Within 10 years, they transformed their energy production from oil, from fossil to nuclear, and now they have for 30 years a very steady and reliable and a very clean energy productions. But the Greens, they don't support it. And why? Maybe because they don't want to solve the problem. They just want to change the way we live. Watermelons, indeed. And this is why they want turbines everywhere. In our environment, where our farmers used to work in peace instead of supporting the only logical solution, let our farmers work on their farms. Let us, as conservatives, preserve our forests and our nature and our natural beauty, and let us use nuclear energy. Thank you.
Let me move to a related point, in tapping on part of what you said. You said that the left are best represented by watermelons in terms of a green exterior, but really pushing a red agenda, which has tied to it bigger and more intrusive government. So let me ask Máté a question, and that is is the government a good steward of the land and other environmental assets that are already in its control, or is the government a poor steward of that? In other words, should we assume that bigger government will necessarily mean a cleaner environment?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a very interesting and complex question because government can be a poor manager of this issue, but I think government and the state is the one who can provide a good solution for complex issues like environmental issues, because we have to reconcile different aspects, economic aspects, political aspects, social aspects, and of course environmental aspects at the same time. And no other actors in this field are capable to do so. I think governments and states were established to represent common interest, and the so-called social contract is or was made to establish an institute like a state to represent our common interest in the most effective way. And environmental issues are common interests, and they are complex as well. So we cannot rely on the individuals because they don't have the capital, they don't have the power, the authority, and they don't even have the knowledge in most of the cases to act properly and in time and effectively. We cannot rely on companies neither, because they follow mostly self-interest, profit interest, and social responsibility is a side project in the best case, but we cannot rely on them in the whole case. So all we have, all we can rely on is states and governments. Of course, there can be malfunctions in this situation. This is why we have to hold accountable the state and the government, because maybe we will have some modification during the process. Maybe we will have to account our leaders in this question, but we don't have better option than rely on them and I can say use them for this issue.
Loise, do you agree? Do you think that in order for us to have a cleaner environment, we have to accept a larger role for the state?
I think that's a very good question. The challenge of climate change, I think, is too important to leave to the left, and this is what we've been discussing throughout this conference. And Conservatives can therefore reclaim our heritage as the original conservationists. So it's really important to note that there's no trade-off between the economy and the environment, and that Conservatives shouldn't feel that they have to sort of surrender their principles in order to tackle climate change and environmental degradation. So the connection between economic growth, creating jobs and protecting the environment is crucial. The UK in particular is a really good example of this. So we've demonstrated that marrying the low carbon transition with clean economic growth and creating new jobs has been a really successful approach. So pre-COVID, since 1990, the UK reduced its emissions by over 40%. While growing the economy by more than 2/3. So it can be done in a way that is clean and that is good for the economy at the same time. I think the idea of a state-led agenda that is sceptical of the private sector just puts off anyone who isn't on the left of politics, like us in this room, I assume. It allows for no space for the market to lead. So we need both public and private investments, crucially, for the low-carbon transition to be successful.
The United States pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, yet it had the greatest drop in CO2 emissions of any signatory of the Paris Climate Agreement, in large part because of substituting gas for coal and other developments. Sorry, go on.
I think in terms of the pulling out of the Paris Agreement, the UK was a little bit disappointed to see that. But I think as well as what you've just said, it was also that private sector and the market had seen that the net zero transition was the way that it was going. So that's why it helped as well.
Rob, what do you think about the role of the state versus the role of the private sector in terms of this responsibility?
Well, it has to be a shared responsibility. I think the state should make rules, but what we see now in the European Parliament is they are killing innovation. They're not only telling what to do, but also how to do it. If you are a government and you make the rules, but you have you go for a neutral solution, then the market will do his job. And I think that is the solution. But now the European Parliament, what I just said, Repower EU, we have a quota on renewables, and we all disagree, or we all agree on nuclear energy. But it's very difficult for the industry to invest in nuclear energy if there is a quota for 45% of renewables. That means solar, wind, or biomass, and that's not the solution. So I think there is a responsibility of the government to set the rules and let the market do their job.
I just want to add one quick example, and that is in California, we have a water shortage, primarily because the rain falls in the north and most people are in the south. In San Diego County, we have the largest desalination plant on the west coast. But desal is very energy intensive. So when government drives up the cost of energy in California, they're also making it less economical to use desalination in order to solve our water challenge. So you have a compounding of government policies in one area, making it more difficult to function in another area. Máté, I think you have a...
Yeah, just one notion. So, yeah, I totally agree with Rob. So the regulatory environment is for setting goals, not to tell the economy how to deal with the issue. It's their job to figure out how we can go to A to B. But the government and the state has the job to set the goal, and they have to be smart enough or bold enough to listen to the responses from the economy, because maybe the goals are wrong, and we have to correct the goals and help the economy reach the goals, not tell them how to reach the goals. So yeah, I totally agree.
Rob, I know you have to go get a plane, but do you want to add any final thoughts before you have to run?
Well, yes, if we're killing the free market, then that's the opposite of what we as conservatives want. That's pure communism, and that is what we see, especially in the European Parliament. They're not looking for solutions, and that's why we have to come together, work together, and speak out, because it's the left has captured all the right words. We just spoke about it's marketing, biomass, etc. Because it's very bad for the environment and very bad for nature. But the left is doing this, and everyone is buying it. 5 years ago we had global warming, and nobody noticed, but the predictions were much worse than what we have measured. And then suddenly no one noticed, but it's climate changed. And we have to be aware, and we have to fight against them with arguments, but also by coming together and work on real solutions, not only on technical basis, but also on political basis. And then I have to go, and I want to thank everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. We understand if Rob maximizes his carbon footprint to make us plain today. Our topic today is in search of a permanent narrative. And part of a narrative is vocabulary. And it seems to me that the left has been successful in terms of shaping the vocabulary and therefore creating the box in which we argue the debate. For example, climate crisis has replaced climate change, which replaced global warming. When it was global warming, that was a disprovable assertion. You could measure it and determine whether that is provable or not. Climate change is a non-provable term. You cannot prove one way or another whether the climate is changing because the climate has been changing for 4 billion years. Carbon emissions as opposed to carbon dioxide emissions. There are no carbon emissions. That's like calling water vapor hydrogen emissions. Water and hydrogen behave differently. Carbon is graphite. Carbon is what the lead of your pencil is made out of. But carbon dioxide is chemically different than carbon. The use of the term climate change denier, using political terms like consensus or claiming that 99% of climate scientists agree on this or that. My question for you, Loise, is do conservatives have to argue using the terms that the left has chosen, or are there different terms that more accurately work to our advantage?
I think it depends on the terms that you're using. So some of the terms you've used, like crisis, that is a very difficult term for Conservatives to get behind. But in the UK, the Conservative Party has no issue with the term climate change. It's just interesting to see the sort of different opinions around the world on this. And in terms of things like green conservatism, so the whole agenda for today, I think, is largely based on Roger Scruton's work on green philosophy. So I don't think we need to use a different term, sustainable instead of green, for example, because green conservatism, green philosophy is a conservative tradition. We have a strong history and tradition of it. And in Roger Scruton's arguments, he saw environmental protection as quintessentially conservative. So he was absolutely right that Conservatives have the best solutions to tackle climate change. And again, the UK Conservatives have no issue with that term. I think we need to reclaim this narrative, and we don't need to, it doesn't matter what the term is, as long as we reclaim the narrative and put forward the market-based conservative solutions.
Máté, let me ask you, the top environmental issues around the world are access to clean drinking water and malaria. These are problems that directly affect hundreds of millions of people around the world. And however, those are different challenges than the climate. So my question to you is, do we have to give in to the left's view that the only environmental issue is climate change, or can we expand that and argue on the full range of environmental issues that go beyond climate change to these other matters that affect so many people around the world?
You know, there is a theory in the psychology. It's called the finite pool of worries, that you cannot worry at the same time about many things, just a few of them. For example, we could see during the COVID pandemic, when it broke in, the pandemic, we almost forgot about climate change. And in the media, it just appeared like in the context of the COVID. And during the war, we can see articles not just in the Hungarian media, but in the international media, that what is the impact on the climate of the war. But we do not really care about the climate right now. And this is because it's the nature of the human race that we cannot worry about everything at the same time. And I think, of course, we should use a more holistic approach in the protect of environment, but we cannot do it. And the institute of mine is called Climate Policy Institute, but we are working with energy and environmental issues as well. But we have to use this kind of narrative to break in into the mainstream and influence it. And there is a debate right now that there are bubbles. And what should we do with that effect? We should break up the bubbles. Could we break up the bubbles? I'm not sure. Should we influence or change the direction of the mainstream in the bubble, or should we create another bubble and make a competition between the bubbles? And right now, what is effective on the conservative side, in my opinion, is creating an other bubble and creating another narrative framework, but we cannot change the mainstream in its side because they just ban our narrative. They don't use our words, they use their own words, they communicate to their own audience, and they influence into the bubble, but outside of the bubble they don't. They cannot do it, and this is the place where we can start. And about climate change, in the previous panel there were really good thoughts about there is, of course, mitigation. It's very important to mitigate the emission, but there is adaptation, there is carbon capture, there is geoengineering, and so on and so on. So there is the place where we can start. We can provide other alternative solutions, for example, and we can provide maybe more pragmatic solutions as well.
Loise, 90% of the plastics that end up in the ocean come from one of about a dozen rivers, none of which are in North America and none of which are in Europe. Yet when I go to a restaurant in California, I get a plastic straw which turns to goo within a matter of minutes, and it is now illegal for a server in California to offer me a straw. They have to make me ask for it. Should I have to do that?
The straw has been a big debate, I think, in your area. I think in terms of this question, the wider concept of the polluter pays principle comes into play. So the fact that it's basically based on common sense, and I think it's a very conservative way to look at things. So those who produce the pollution should therefore take responsibility for managing it, and the damage that's done to human health and the environment, they have to pick up the tab basically, and act responsibly. And again, it's about personal responsibility. So I guess in this case, it's your choice if you want to use the paper straw or not.
So the reason I ask that is that it seems to me that when the left institutes policies that drive typical voters insane, without making a significant improvement to the environment, that it creates an opportunity for conservatives to offer an alternative. It really does drive people bananas when they can't get a plastic straw, or they constantly having to ask a server for it. So I'm just curious if when the left goes too far by pursuing their solutions, what type of opportunities does it create for us to say we're going to address the environment without driving you crazy? Máté, do you have a thought on that?
One of the key elements of being a conservative is the lack of extremism. So when they do something extreme, for example, absolutize the issue of plastic straws, you can point it out that it's insane. It has no point, but we have another solution for the problem. For example, we can help third world countries to deal with the waste problem, and it's effective actually. So if you can point out the dumb thing what the left do all the time, and you can provide an alternative solution, I think you can win the debate. The situation is right now that we just start this debate with the left, and we have to create our own narrative. And we have to do it on the international level, because there are some really good movements on national levels. But we have to build a network as they did, because this narrative should override, overshadow the left's narrative. So we have to compete with them on the international level as well, and this is why this event is actually very helpful and good for this cause.
Lois, I want energy and food to be everywhere, to be cheap and very plentiful, to be very cheap and very plentiful. I've never heard a leftist in my country say that they want energy to be cheap. Do we want energy to be cheap?
Of course. I think in the UK we've been very fortunate in terms of the cheap energy we've been able to produce. So you might have seen in Peter's presentation yesterday, he was showing the benefits of offshore wind, which has worked very well in the UK. It might not be the solution for everyone. And of course it needs to be backed up with a base load that we've talked a lot about here, as nuclear energy would be a great solution there. So yeah, sorry, what was your question initially?
Whether we want energy to be cheap.
Well, definitely.
Do you agree we want energy to be cheap?
Yes, there was an argument on the European level that maybe increasing the energy prices with this measurement we can force the households to invest in, I don't know, electric cars, or they make more energy efficient their homes. This is what Fit for 55 is about. For example, the extension of the ETS system to buildings and transportation is about increasing artificially the prices and force the households to make some difference on their lifestyles. And right now the prices are high and we cannot see the difference because they just spent all the money they had to pay the energy bills. So I am very skeptic with this concept, and I think energy should be clean and affordable and acceptable as well.
Yeah, so I think this affordability matter in a time of high inflation is a real opportunity for us, because the left doesn't want energy to be cheap because they inherently, as part of their religion, believe in scarcity. And scarcity and price go hand in hand. By making something more expensive, you'll wind up making it more scarce or less attainable. I want to make sure that by the end of this panel that we come to some roadway forward, some pathway forward in terms of messaging. It seems to me, and I'd like to get your feedback on this, that number one, we have to work to, we develop our own vocabulary rather than adopting the vocabulary of people who oppose our ideas. And number two, we have to challenge the underlying narrative. James Carville, who's an American leftist campaign strategist, he's a very interesting guy, not because he looks like an alien, but because he's just a very smart guy who works for the left. James Carville advises, never accept your opponent's underlying premise as valid. Whatever that premise is, reject it and create your own premise. But I find that when we deal with these forest fires in California, the left has one and only one response, and that's climate change, and that's it. And if we fail to challenge that, we fail to point out that, wait a second, if these wildfires are only caused by climate change, then your solution is we have to wait until the climate of the planet not only stops, but cools before these wildfires are somehow addressed. And that, of course, is ludicrous, because there's no horizon by which that actually happens. So what is your advice to the broader conservative movement as we work to shape a new narrative that will work to elect conservatives, but also establish credibility and solutions on these environmental questions? I'll start with you, Loise.
Yeah, great question. I think that, as I said previously, the sort of Roger Scruton style of argument is the one that we've got to use best. The green conservatism, the green philosophy, we already have these terms, and these were probably our terms in the first place. So it's reclaiming that narrative. Margaret Thatcher and Teddy Roosevelt, they're all conservationists at heart.
So can you elaborate on that a little bit for those of us who are victims of public school?
No, I was too, don't worry.
Okay, so was I.
Yeah, so he basically said that environmental protection is conservative. So the green philosophy is that conservatives, they have the best solutions through personal responsibility, through local sovereignty, and that people must be empowered to take charge of their environment. So it's again, the polluter pays principle, the responsibility of it. And as I've mentioned, we've got examples from Margaret Thatcher. Like I said, she often spoke of the environmental challenge. She said that no generation has a freehold on this earth. That's actually on our business cards at the Conservative Environmental Network. We think it's so striking. So yeah, I think it's all about reclaiming the narrative and being more vocal about what Conservatives have actually done to tackle environmental degradation and biodiversity loss, because we have actually done some good things around the world. We just don't show it off as much as the left.
You know, I want to seize on that personal responsibility theme for a moment. I work with a lot of candidates, and I ask them this question. Do you believe that someone who breaks the law, and in breaking the law pollutes the air or the water or the environment, do you think that they should be held accountable? Do you think if they break the law by polluting, that they should be held accountable and they should be prosecuted? Oh, yes, of course. And then so they, of course, after a moment, they say, yes, of course, that they should be. My follow-up question is, would it really kill you to mention that once in a while? Because the only time I ever hear conservatives talking about environmental issues is when they're complaining about some regulation. That's the only time. I don't hear the restatement of the value that we value a clean environment, that a clean environment is a conservative principle, and that they believe that polluters should be held accountable. If the only time you're talking about the environment is to complain about some regulation adopted in the name of the environment, people lose the value. They think that, well, it's very easy to then cast the conservative of being on the side of the polluter and pollution. So I think that you're spot on in terms of the correlation between the conservative tenet of personal responsibility and how that works with environmental protection.
Scruton used the word oikophilia to describe this whole phenomenon. This is a Greek word, and it's about the love of your home. Because if you live in a specific place, if you were born somewhere and were raised up somewhere, you have a personal connection to the place, and you would like to protect it as you get to know it. So it will be very important for you. It will be a personal connection, and this is what conservative movement can build on, because it's totally different than the globalist leftist narrative that there is a global issue and we will need global solutions to that, maybe even global governance. No, the conservative solution is local. It's about localism, it's about the love of the place, it's about the love of the fellow people, because we do it for even them, to protect them, their health, for example. It's about patriotism, and it's about pragmatism. So I think it's the most important aspect of conservatism, that we are not biased by ideologies or noble ideas. We have goals, and we will analyze which path we should take to reach that goal. And there will be bad paths, or at least there will be paths we don't want to take, and there will be other paths we should walk on. And this pragmatic approach is very valuable right now, because we live very difficult times. There is a war in the neighborhood. We are in an energy crisis. So I think Europe really need a conservative approach in this sense, and we need an alliance between us conservatives to tackle this conflict right now.
I think you bring up 2 points that I think work well together. One is the notion that private property is part of the solution here, and together with personal responsibility, as well as challenging the narrative. I hear all the time that conservatives don't care about the environment. I live in a very conservative neighborhood, and everybody owns a gun, a horse, and a pickup truck. It is a very conservative area, but yet every weekend, my neighbors are taking care of their homes, they're taking care of their property, they're taking care to make their land more defensible against wildfire. And then I contrast that with the government-owned land in my neighborhood, which is a giant field of fuel waiting to erupt in fire. Because the government land is owned by everyone, which means it's owned by no one. And consequently, it seems that the fact that individuals take care of what they own and what they're responsible for, this love of where they live and taking responsibility for their homes and their property, needs to be part of the discussion here, because it's obvious. You ask any person, would you rather use the washroom at home or the washroom at the train station? And pretty much everybody, maybe not everybody, but almost everybody will say that they would rather use a washroom at home that somebody is responsible for than the one that the government owns that no one is responsible for. Lois, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think a positive vision is so important. So that's what sets us apart from the left as well. So it sets us apart from the people who are the people who don't want too much action, and the people who are the sort of doomsday preachers. And like we've said, the oikophilia, which is the love of home, and the personal responsibility, is something that we have that is different to the left's vision. And like you said, that is so important. There's a few examples, again from the UK, of course, because that's where I know best. Of community-led projects, so they have natural environments in their areas, and they all do sort of litter picks on a weekend and things. It's a very similar sort of area by the sounds of it. And yeah, it's so important that if you live in that area, for you to have ownership of that. And again, that's another conservative principle, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure it works to go around telling people I'm an oikophiliac. That
No.
sounds like there's some other things going on there. But I do think that there's an underlying principle that we can tap into there to challenge that narrative that conservatives don't care about where they live. Of course we care about where we live. Take a look at any housing project where people own their homes and compare it to a housing project where people only rent. And you'll see the difference in which people take care of their own property. Likewise, nobody washes a rental car. People wash their own cars, but they don't wash someone else's car that someone else owns. So where do we go from here in terms of a positive vision that conservatives can offer? I noticed that the left, at every opportunity, attaches the word anti to their opponents. We're always labeled as, anti-woman, anti-environment, anti-handicapped, anti-children, anti-senior, anti-labor, anti, because they know that it's better to be on the pro side. So to wrap up, let's go into the conclusion by what are we for? How do we define effectively what conservatives are for in this area going forward? What's some of the concepts and some of the vocabulary that conservatives here and watching online can use going forward to win the argument as part of a new narrative?
Edmund Burke, one of the founding father of the conservative ideology, said that there is a chain between generations, and we are responsible for the next generation, what word we will we will provide for the next generation. And this is the foundation of environmental protection also, because we are doing it for the next generation, for our children and grandchildren, and it's about the community. The left has a narrative which absolutizes the individual. You are responsible for the harm you cause for the environment, and we are responsible as a race. We are a tumor on the planet. We are a virus that should be erased, or at least the impact should be decreased on the planet. But we are the problem as an individual or as a race. And I think we should think in communities. Mostly, it can be a small town or even a street, a community of a street, or it can be a nation, and it can be the cooperation of the nations, but it should be some kind of communities, and we should do it for the next generation, because without people, environmental protection is pointless. We do it for ourselves, we do it for each other, and we do it for the future generations. So this anthropocentric approach is very important, and it's a different, like the left's narrative, I think.
Lois, I'm going to go to you, but it reminds me, what you've just prompted me to think of is that very often conservatives, we talk about our principles of lower taxes, limited government, personal responsibility, strong national defense, maybe we need to add a fifth to that to make it explicit in terms of believing in maintaining that chain of responsibility from one generation to the next, and that having a clean environment, a clean neighborhood, or a clean community is part of that. Loise?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you've said about Edmund Burke and leaving the planet in a better state for future generations. I think, again, to have this positive vision, it's all about the intergenerational fairness, the clean growth that we've seen. So, for example, Boris Johnson has been one of the most successful green champions, I believe, because of his leadership, and he's sort of monopolised on that through looking at it through a jobs and economy lens. So he's put in so much investment into renewable energy, which has worked in the UK very well. And it's got on side a lot of Conservatives because of the job element. It can be done clean growth, so we can grow the economy at the same time as cutting emissions. And I think that's the positive message that we can have, as well as the foundations of Edmund Burke and Roger Scruton with the personal responsibility side of it. And we just need to reclaim our heritage as the original conservationists.
Yeah, I agree. I think we walk away with the need to challenge the prevailing narrative and not allow the left's narrative to go unanswered. That we define what we're for, not only what we're against. Everybody knows what we're against. We talk about what we're against all the time. There are some people in the movement who just love talking about what they're against, but they also need to talk about what they're for. And one element that we haven't had the time to go into is the importance of storytelling. Data and statistics are boring. You can see people's eyes glaze over when people talk in terms of jargon, percentages, and abstract numbers. Nobody knows what we're talking about. But the human heart is conditioned to respond to the stories of other human beings. And so if we look, I think we don't have time to explore it today, but I think going forward, if we find those stories where conservative solutions to environmental challenges have solved somebody's problem and someone's life is better as a result, that can punch through the rhetoric and the jargon and the abstract ideas and really connect with people. I'll let you give your closing thoughts.
I totally agree. We need stories. What I learned during the migration crisis, actually, what the left did with this whole issue, they tell us personal stories about the migrants, although most of the migrants were in the 20s, and they were male and they were economic migrants to Europe in the 2050. They tell us stories about little children and families and so on, and people loved these stories. And this is what we should do with the environmental protection issue. They tell us a global narrative that there is an invisible enemy, CO2 and climate change, and we should fight it together as a global community, and you should make personal sacrifices to do so, and we should show the personal stories. What are the consequences of their proposals? What they did wrong, and how the burdens of the families raised because of bad green policies, and what are the alternative paths we can provide them. So yes, this is a job ahead us, and we are ready to do so.
Loise, you have the last word, and you have 1 minute.
Okay, cool. I agree that storytelling is crucially important. So I'm from a small mining town in the north of England, and of course all of the mines closed years ago. And there hasn't been a lot of investment in that region since. So this is why Boris Johnson has been so successful, I think, in the sort of green agenda, because a part of the region has been revitalised through the new technologies that we've got going forwards. And it's similar with the SMRs that have come on board, that will come on board in future. It will give more jobs, and it's all about the economic argument that we can put forward as well, which does differentiate us from the left.
I think it's clear that conservative ideas lead to a better quality of life, not only in terms of greater wealth, but also in terms of ensuring that the next generation does inherit a quality environment that is better or as good as what we've inherited, and we have to make that case going forward. So I think it's been a wonderful conference, and I'm glad that we could have this dialogue to help to wrap it up. So thank you very much. I'd like to please put your hands together and thank our panelists for spending their time with us today. Some great insight. And for our hosts, we are exactly on time. Thank you very much.
Well done there.
Good job.